want to talk tonight about what paralyzes you. We saw that the man in John was paralyzed. And I wonder first, is it your heart? Sometimes we can be paralyzed by our hearts or the attitudes of our hearts. Sometimes it's the attitude that, I've heard this all before. I was brought up in Sunday school. I know all of this. And sometimes it's a thing of, you know what? Those people that go to church are no better than me. I'm good enough. I do good things to other people. I go, I give to the poor and I help the needy. But, so I think I'm pretty good. But as we looked at our story that was read in John, the first thing that Jesus said was, rise. Now, it took an awful lot of faith, I think, for this man to just rise. And he had sat beside this pool for several years, and nothing had happened. So I think, it took an awful lot of faith just to rise. And sometimes it can take a lot of faith to step inside a church door. Sometimes it can take a lot of faith for us to open our hearts to grow more with Christ, to learn more about Christ. These are all things that we can think of. In James chapter 4, it says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift us up. That's James 4:10. The paralytic was not asked to do anything else at that point except rise. So that's the first area I want us to look at, is let's rise. Let's stand up, have faith, and open our hearts to what God has for us. We don't have any hang-ups, do we? So, the Lord is a loving God, and sometimes people get hung up on the part of they think God is just up there judging them with every little thing they do. And they think, well, I can't do anything right, so why bother? But God is a loving God. God wants to have a relationship with us. He wants us to seek him through reading his word and spend time with him in prayer. And he's a forgiving God. And I don't know what your hang-ups may be. They could be addictions. It could be something like anger. It could be anxiety. It could be depression. It could be just any little thing in your heart that maybe doesn't allow you to go that next step. And I've watched an awful lot of people who at one point, they were doing great in their life. But because of hang-ups that they had, they gradually grew away from the Lord. And what we don't realize sometimes is Jesus wants us first to rise, and the next step is taking up our mat. Take up all the hang-ups, all the anger, all that anxiety, that depression, all the addictions. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy. And I'm not, also, I want to make this very clear, okay? Sometimes we need medical help to help us as well as God. But we can take up our mat and give it to him and say, God, I'm just having a hard time dealing with this. I just hate going into crowds of people. I just get so nervous and I just can't breathe in there. But God can help us through that. And, some people have addictions. Some of them are as simple as being addicted to food. I like food. But it could be addictions to shopping. It could be, addictions to drugs. It could be addictions to many things. Anything that takes the place or takes us away from what God wants us to be can be an addiction. And as we take up our mat, we need to hand that over to Christ and say, here you are. I'm going to trust you to help me through this. The third thing I want to look at is your hurts. How many of you have been hurt before? Oh my goodness. I am sure every one of us, if we really looked deep inside, we have been hurt at some time in our life. Maybe there's been a separation in your marriage. Maybe there's been a divorce. Maybe somebody has been really mean to you. But we can't live our lives holding on to our past. Because if we're going to hold on to that past, it's pretty hard for us to move forward with. So the third command, what was the third command? Walk. So we're going to walk forward. And I just want to read Isaiah 61:3. And it says, the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. And when I think of an oak, I think of something really sturdy. And so as we move forward, we're going to become more sturdy. Our roots are going to grow down, and our branches are going to grow up, and we're going to move forward with God. In Proverbs, it talks about the Spirit of the Lord is a strong tower. And I think often of the song that talks about Jesus being a strong tower and the righteous run into him and they're saved. And I think, along our path, we may struggle with any of these areas, but Jesus never leaves us. He's always there for us to depend on. And I was thinking, God uses all kinds of people. And some of the people I thought of are David, who was an adulterer. He ran around with somebody else's wife. But God used him in a mighty way. Jacob, who was a cheater. He cheated his brother out of the blessing. I think of Rahab, who was a prostitute, but yet God used her to look after people, some spies that were spying out the new land. And you know what? She's in the genealogy of Christ. Matthew, a tax collector. And back then, tax collectors weren't very nice. They liked to take more than their share. Paul, who used to be Saul, was a murderer. He murdered Christians, but God still used him. Thomas was a doubter. He doubted God, but God still used him. God doesn't just look at the things that are on the outside. God looks at our hearts.